Hello, everyone. So we're gonna get started, and today, as many of you will know, it's our third lecture of the lecture series of our spring lecture series. But in fact, I think this is much more than a lecture. I think it's more of a special occasion for everyone. Certainly for me, it is, right? And because the person that is going to be giving this lecture is Kate Schwennsen, our former director of the School of Architecture for 10 years, is that right? And the reason why some of us, many of us, I think, at least me, one of the reasons why we decided to stay in a place like this. So, to introduce Kate, I have asked two people that I like a lot to speak, to give a little bit of a short spiel. If they can, probably they won't be able. And it will be Ulrike Heine first and Matt Powers after that. So Ulrike.
Okay. So you're running into a problem because whenever I speak, I have to write things down to be precise, because if not, I'm going to talk for 50 minutes here. And then I won't give Kate the chance to actually talk at all. So today it's my honor and my pleasure to introduce Kate Schwennsen to you guys. Kate joined Clemson University in 2010 as our chair and afterwards as our director, as our school grew. She joined us from Iowa State University, where she holds both of her degrees from, a BA in architecture with distinction, of course, and an MA in architecture. So that already started her career of being exceptional. While we all love Kate, who she is, Kate is a highly recognized leader, if not one of the most successful female leaders of the architecture community in our time. Before coming to Clemson, she was the 2006 AIA president, and in this position, the second woman in 149 years. Just face it, it's pretty impressive. I'm not exaggerating when I say she's one of the most inspiring and influential women in the field of architecture in the United States, always bridging architectural education with practice. She's a role model for all female architects, always ambitious, to the point, and at the same time, highly diplomatic, which is actually not easy. And on top of it, she's a wonderful wife, yes, Barry. She's a caring mother and a dedicated grandmother. Needless to say, she received numerous national awards as an outstanding educator and a contributor to the field of architecture, all from the most prestigious organizations. I just want to mention the latest one, not the last one. It's the 2020 award as one of the most admired educators. It's always given to 30 educators in the year, awarded by Design Intelligence. Just to recap quickly, that was during her time as a director and administrator of the School of Architecture, which at that time were 4 programs, not always easy to deal with. But on top of it, she gets actually an educating award. So I had the joy to work with Kate very closely as her assistant director. And I can easily say Kate was for us, and not just for me, but for all of us, a fantastic boss, a mentor, an advocate, and at the same time, a friend. She owns a skill that we would all love to own: her magic laughter. A contagious laughter that makes you feel comfortable, even in every situation, even the awkward ones. That could equally mean approval, joy, or profound disapproval, or simply, you better stop talking. When Kate started, we were slightly unorganized, but a very well-respected architecture program. No vision, no mission, and barely accredited. And I'm intentionally exaggerating here a little bit, but let's face it, it was more or less like that. The School of Architecture has grown under Kate's leadership to an entity of multiple highly respected, easily accredited, and also awarded programs. We couldn't have done it without her. So thank you for all you've done for us. I can't wait to hear your story.
Can I have your notes? My name is Matt Powers. I'm director of landscape architecture, and for 4 years, I met with Kate once a week for an hour, and that was about 45 or so weeks a year. So I'm not very good at math, but I added it up, and it's about 200 hours, 200 meetings, and that's a lot, a whole lot, as a matter of fact. I mentioned it to my wife and told her that, and she said, "Wow. I bet she'd like to have that time back." And I don't blame her for saying that. It's probably true. But here's the thing. You're not going to ever get those 200 hours with her because she's going to give those to Barry and to her sisters and her daughters and her grandchildren. So I thought what I would do is share with you just a couple things that I learned from those 200 hours, and maybe you can benefit from them as much as I have. The first thing I would just say about Kate is, of that time, there was never one time that she was late. She was always on time, 200 for 200, always on time. That's pretty impressive. And so because of that, I was generally probably maybe 195 on time because I knew she was going to be there and I did not want to let her down. So she was always on time. She was also very well prepared. We would have things that we would discuss, and I would bring something up, and she would spin around in her chair. She'd open up a filing cabinet, and she would pull out just the right file, open it up, there it is, always ready to go, incredibly prepared. Sometimes there would be an issue that would require immediate attention, and she'd spin to the right to her computer and send an email out immediately and take care of that issue. Her communication skills were impeccable. If you emailed her, you would get a response almost before you sent it, like really, really fast. And I think what all this shows is just her level of professionalism and the example that she set for all of us, not just faculty and staff, but also the students. And I think for me personally, when you look and you work with someone who is at that level of professionalism and is always bringing their best, and as I like to say, always making the layups, doing all the little things and making sure that those get done, never miss a layup, it makes you kind of want to do the same. But that's not the only part, I think, a little bit of a secret to her success. The other thing is that she believed in people. And I know that she really believed in me whenever I didn't always believe in myself. And so when someone really believes in you and they encourage you and they shine a light on you and rarely on themselves, combined with that professionalism, when those two things come together, it lifts you up and it makes you want to do your best. And I think that a lot of us were believing that we could do things and we were achieving our best because of her example, but also because of her support and her encouragement. One of the things in all those times, we never really argued, and those of y'all know me, that's pretty amazing in itself, but we never really argued. The only thing we ever really argue about is basketball. And I just think since in that vein, I always know that you had sometimes referred to yourself as air traffic control. That was one of the metaphors you used as a leader. And I always felt more that you were a point guard, and that you were always distributing opportunities to others. You were calling some plays. You were trying to get everybody else's stats up. You were, just making sure that people were where they needed to be. And you had outstanding timing in terms of getting the ball to people when they were open. And I think that as a metaphor, I always felt that you were, the point guard, because the point guard is the captain of the team. I would just like to conclude by saying that if God gave me a wish right now, one wish, I would take those 200 hours and I would give them to each of you so that you would have that time that I had with her. And hopefully it would change you in the same way it changed me for the better. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, yes, it's on. So I think we should just quit right now. I think that would be just fine. Two wonderful friends. It's my honor and privilege to have you as friends, and I think, it's a team sport, and we've got a great team. But I know if my husband is home watching this, he is laughing hysterically about the idea of me being a point guard, because I can't even make a layup, So thank you, Matt, for that. I mean, but really wonderful tributes. I thank you both very much. And, I mean, I've learned at least as much from both of you as you have learned from me, and that's what makes it all work. So I'm going to start with a question, and please call them out. So name some architects, living or dead, whose work inspires you. All right, great. Renzo Piano. Peter Zumthor. Terrific. Frank Gehry. Eileen Gray. Corbusier. Jeannie Gang. Very good. Great. Gaudi. Yes. Any others? You guys did pretty good because, of course, this is part of it, right? And you listed quite a few women in that group, which doesn't always happen. So thank you very much for that. There's some amazing women architects out there now, and there have been through history. Unfortunately, we don't know a lot about them always. So it's Women's History Month, so it's a great time for me to tell my story. Each of us have many stories to tell, and depending on the focus, the stories can be different. You know what my focus is going to be in the telling of my story today. The story I'm going to tell today is a history lesson addressed mostly to the students, and it's the story of a woman who became an architect in the late 20th century and discovered that she could make more of a difference. She could advance practice better outside of practice than inside of practice through really advancing education. My story is also her story. Her story or her story, right? And here's a definition. Yes, it is a feminist creation. It's a play on words. But we know that most of history, much of history as we construct it, does focus on the his, right? Not the her. Because of that, her story is often not told. Architecture and its practice needs more diversity. We know this, right? Architecture will benefit from a greater understanding of her story. Architecture needs to be more inclusive to better serve its purpose. And my purpose today is to try to drive change, which has been my purpose for a long time. This is not a whine session. I've had a very satisfying career, much more satisfying than I could have imagined. I've met amazing people. I've been to wonderful places. But it's not at all like I imagined it would be when I was a student of architecture or a young architect. It's been better, but it's been very different. So I've lived through some interesting times, as we all are now, right? And as all of you will continue to live through interesting times. And I'm hoping that the telling of this her story will give you the confidence to go for it, whatever it is. That's really my goal with this talk, and to drive change. So history, her story, your story, created every day. So I'll try to do 5 short chapters. So in this order, and of course I'll end with the moral of the story. Okay, so growing up baby boomer. I've been here for 12, Tim gets it, yeah. I've been in the South for 12, see, a lot of people don't get it, Tim. They're like, what are you laughing at? So who gets it? A few of you, yes. So I'm a Midwesterner. I've been here for 12 years, but I'm not a Southerner. I'm a Midwesterner, right? And we Midwesterners, we're accustomed to living in the flyover states where people have no idea what it is, who we are, what goes on. So this is all wrong, right? This is a map made by people that aren't from the Midwest. So Tim, you can't answer this, but can somebody else tell me really where is Iowa on that map? Ohio, yes, thank you. and for those of you who don't know, these things get confused all the time, especially those states with only vowels, like Ohio and Iowa and Idaho sometimes. Yeah, Idaho's in there. So where you see Ohio, that's Iowa. The Midwest, I would say Midwesterners are fairly pragmatic. I don't know if it's the rural roots or whatever, but pragmatism is certainly part of that heritage. Also, we tend to be fairly direct, although not as direct as my German friend over here, which is also, I'm glad that there's somebody more direct than me. And historically, the Midwest, especially Iowa, has been very progressive with some of the first laws that advanced women's rights. Now, times are a little strange right now, so I wouldn't say that's happening. So I grew up in Dubuque, Iowa, which is a city of 60,000 people, or was then. It was a fairly conservative place. And it was like 85% Catholic, and I was Presbyterian. I had this strangest understanding of theology. I was just totally confused. But the dominant culture ruled, right? There were more kids in parochial school than in public school, but we all ate fish on Friday. There was no chance you were going to have anything but fish on Friday. It was a very safe time and a safe place. I would say that my sisters and I, and you see, I'm the oldest of the four in the red robes, and or the red capes. I showed that slide when I was interviewing for this job in this room, when we had much worse furniture. It's better now. But we had a lot of independence. I mean, my mother would just sort of lock us out of the house and say, "I'll see you at supper time," right? Go away, do whatever you're going to do, and come back in time to eat, because it was a safe time. From the time I was 10, my best friend and I would get on the city bus and take our allowance down to the Maid-Rite and have lunch, right? And then we'd get on the city bus and come home. But there was some weird stuff. I didn't understand it was weird at the time, but looking back, it was weird. For instance, all through grade school and junior high, we had to wait to enter the building. I don't know why. I guess the teachers were getting ready or something, right? So the boys all gathered at one door. That was the rule. The boys got in the front door. The girls gathered at the back door. And we didn't do that by choice. That was the assignment. Another weird thing, the girls couldn't wear pants. Well, we could when we walked a mile in the snow to school, which we did. We got across a golf course to get to grade school. But we had to have our skirt on over the pants, and then when we got to school, we had to take the pants off. I need to watch time. Just one when I was in 7th grade, and I probably shouldn't tell this story, but we had a slumber party one night, and we decided that Tuesday would be braless day. Listen, when I was 13, it didn't matter if I wore a bra or not, but we decided Tuesday would be braless day. So then Tuesday comes, and a whole bunch of us get called to the principal's office. It's like, what is going on? Somebody had written a note to somebody else and called the teacher the B word. And so the teacher took the note to the principal's office, and also in this note, it said, "Did you hear that so-and-so and all these people are braless today?" So we got called in and had our straps checked, right? Now, only 3 of us hadn't chickened out, and really, it didn't matter at all. I mean, yes, nobody could have told the difference for me. Anyway, the principal, I won't say his name, he said, I said, why is this a problem? Well, you could cause a disturbance. And I said, how could we cause a disturbance? He said, well, the boys could be, I can't remember his word, but I said, how could the boys be distracted? That was the word. Boys be distracted by this. He said, well, if you really want to know, I'll have Miss Thompson over here get up and jump rope. Yeah, that wouldn't happen today, right? So I started high school in 1971. Yeah, I can still see some of you like, what? A big 2,000 person urban high school with only country club sports for girls. Your choice was golf, tennis, or swimming. Nothing else. We were told actually that track could hurt your childbearing abilities. That same year, I went to the state math contest. You know, what a nerdy thing to do, but I must have been interested or something. Anyway, it really wasn't until I was like second, you know, when they give all the awards at the end and I'm a semifinalist or something, that I looked around and there are no girls there. You know, it's like, where are the girls? I mean, sometimes well, life is for all of us is normal. We feel like everybody lives the same lives we do, right? Just a couple more things about this. I hope it's not true, but perhaps if I would have had brothers, my life would have been different. But we learned to hunt, we learned to fish, we learned to skate, we learned to ski, we learned all those things. And when I was 10 years old, I decided I wanted to be an architect. I don't know why, but we traveled a lot, we saw a lot of things. I loved art, so I asked for a T-square and a drawing board and a triangle, and my parents got it for me. Then in high school, I took a lot of art classes because there weren't architecture classes, and my female art teacher knew I wanted to be an architect, and she said, you know, you should go to school for art. Then you can be an art teacher like me, because architecture is going to be really hard for a girl. Okay, so I didn't listen to her, and I went to Iowa State University for my 4-year degree and my 2-year degree, much like those of you here. And like Clemson, Iowa State University is the only architecture program in the state, and a very good one. We compete in lots of ways, including in Coat Award winners for our students. So the price of college was very reasonable, but I had to pay for most of it. And so I held a series of jobs. I tended bar at the time. The drinking age was 18. And that was fun until, you know, you just get tired of drunk people, really. And I did drafting. I worked construction. When I ran out of money and I had to take a quarter off, I worked construction. I don't know that I was the first woman to work construction in Ames, Iowa, but it seemed like I must have been the only one at the time, because I was famous. I mean, I'd go into a lumber yard and everybody was like, oh, you know, you're the woman working construction. Now in classes, there was one other woman and the guys, and it was fine. That was just the way it was, you know? And the guys were great. I never had any problem with my peers, excuse me, or most of the faculty, but there were a few idiots among the faculty. I remember specifically two faculty members, male faculty members, who told me to my face, I don't think women should be architects. I mean, just, you know, what do you say to that? And then my undergraduate advisor, now I am an undergraduate advisor, but when you have to write that essay when you're applying to grad school about why you should be accepted, right, why you're so wonderful, I made the mistake of asking my undergraduate advisor. And he said, well, not to sound sexist or anything, which is a bad start to a conversation, not to sound sexist or anything, but what's to prevent the university from giving you this chance for a degree and you get pregnant and never use that degree? And I said, what's to prevent you from getting hit by a truck? I didn't, it just sort of came out. I've gotten more diplomatic with maturity. Although I was feeling it and living it, I didn't fully understand how the status of women was being importantly reset in the years between my birth and my college graduation. So we'll just look at a few examples. So when I was 3, first birth control pill, which didn't affect the Catholic community very much, but I'll just go through these. I'm not going to read them all. 65. 65. Really? There were laws prohibiting the prescription or use of contraceptives by married couples? Wow. Uh, 1971, women with preschool children were often not hired because men should have those jobs. It didn't matter if maybe they were a single mother or something. This one is great, right? The court finally declares women as persons. 1971. Title IX. So that brought us football, not football, volleyball, softball, all those other sports. I like this Equal Credit Opportunity Act. Look at that. What? Yes. What? Yes. 1974. And the Pregnancy Discrimination Act was obviously important too. So, and also at this time, there was a study done of women in architecture. It wasn't a pretty picture, right? As you can imagine, you see some of the major findings there. So that leads to my second chapter, becoming an architect, the 80s. So I had an offer from my, one of my studio faculty, who was a lifelong mentor for me, just passed away in December, to go to work for their practice in Des Moines. It's a firm that had won a PA award years earlier, so they could really do innovative work. They sort of moved into the senior living market for predominantly for their work. Anyway, it was a great place for me to land. I was given lots of rope and lots of opportunities. I loved the work. It was complicated, it was messy, there were lots of people. It really allowed me to grow. This is downtown Des Moines, and there's a David, so where's the light here? Okay. That's a David Chipperfield library, and over here out of the picture is Renzo Piano building. Des Moines has some really good architecture. Tim knows this too. I traveled a lot, as did my husband, who I met at the office and who's still my husband. And it seemed like we often met at the airport, sort of going different ways. At that time, I didn't mind being the only woman in the room. It was normal, you know. But sometimes my difference was called out, which was always uncomfortable, right? So like if I'd go on interviews with the two male principals, the design principal and the managing principal, sometimes the client assumed I was the secretary, right? Or sometimes at airports, a couple times somebody thought I was a flight attendant. That one really, it's like, what? So some of the work, here are a couple retirement communities in Florida. You can see they have some similar things going on, but they're different buildings. Learned a lot. Some retirement communities, one in Connecticut, one in Massachusetts, and a house on Long Island in New York. Some unbuilt work, a historic hotel that was so termite ridden we couldn't do anything with it. A retirement community in El Paso, and some housing in Florida again. This is the only, in 10 years, this is the only project I worked on in Iowa. And it was one of the first things I worked on. The drawings were done. My husband did these drawings. This is the church, his mother's church, the church in this little town in Iowa. And so I did construction and administration on this project, which you learn a whole lot, starting being a young, emerging architect being on site, which was a great opportunity. Some of you have heard this story. My husband and I ended up getting married in this church, and when I asked my sister to stand up with me, she asked me what she should wear, and I sent her a paint sample. So this is the project that made me an architect. So this is La Posada in Green Valley, Arizona. I was the project manager. I was not yet licensed, so I couldn't call myself an architect, but the project manager for this project. I made the mistake of figuring out that I'd worked 4 months of uncompensated overtime to get this thing out the door on time. And the reason that it had to get out the door on time, I'm telling you the sort of bad parts of the story, but is because the lump sum payment of $536,000 that we got on December 3rd, 1985, it's amazing how some of this stuff is burned on your brain, right? Bought the firm out of an over $1 million line of credit at less than 50 cents on the dollar. It was a really interesting financial time in the late 80s in this country. It went out, you know, even though the drawings had a huge addenda afterwards. So with this client, and this ended up winning a National Design Award. It was a really great project. And later in life, I ran into a couple of people who lived there, and they told me how much they loved it. And it was like, you know, that's one of the most rewarding things ever about being an architect, when people appreciate what you did. So one of these clients embarrassed me into taking the exam. I was not licensed. And he said, you know, Kate, I'd like to be able to introduce you as my architect. So at that time, the exam was a 4-day thing. It was only offered once a year. I'd watch my husband study for days, months, whatever. I did not have the time, you know, I could not do it. I had my first baby. So I took the exam cold. The last day was a 12-hour design exam. So I took all 9 parts. I was the first one done with every single exam, which freaked everybody else out, right? They thought I really had studied. Anyway, I passed 6 out of the 9 parts, which I thought was great, you know, and so the next year I retook the 3 parts I failed and passed those, and life was good, and I was licensed. And here's my certificate from Iowa. So at that time, they did beautiful hand calligraphied certificates, but focus in on this blow up. When I first got this, I was just furious, right? Just furious. And then I just started laughing. You know, it's like, you know, well, this is a moment in history. This is years later when I got appointed to the state licensing board. I brought it up, and the executive director was so, oh, yeah, we've taken gender out of those certificates. I'm happy to give you another one. I said, no. So, at the same time, life was happening for me and in architecture. And I changed firms because I'd sort of reached a point where I knew I didn't want to go farther there. The firm I changed to was really nice people, but the work wasn't as interesting to me. But, you know, a lot was happening outside of, again, like when I was growing up, how the status of women was being changed. A lot of things were happening in the 80s. I mean, here, you know, many of our historians, I'm sure, remember this article, right? Is Modern Architecture Dead? This postmodern, and many of you students probably know some of this too. There were crises going on in the 80s. It was this decade of bust, boom, bust, you know, and then down again. So just a few things that happened in the 80s. We had a huge public health crisis then, which we have now, but we sort of have forgotten about. I certainly knew people who died of AIDS, and when you got AIDS, it was like a death sentence. It was over. The first PC, you know, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, designed by a 21-year-old college student who got a B in the class. Start of the ARE. There was a liability insurance crisis. There was a stock market crash. I mean, there was a lot going on that was, and I love this picture because I think I had that suit, and I know for a fact my husband had that gray pinstripe suit. Look at this, 200 years of interest rates in the US. 1981 is that one, 15.8%. We bought our first house in 1980, well, close to that, 1984, I think. And the interest rate was 14%. The profession was starting to recognize that there was sexism in architecture. Here's Denise Scott Brown, who, along with Robert Venturi, her partner in life and in practice, really changed architecture. And here, she wrote this in 1975, but didn't publish it until 1989 because she thought it would hurt her career. You know, read that last part, right? Unbelievable. So at the end of that decade of the 80s, we really were a profession in search of redefinition because of all these crises. I mean, there were just, practice was very unstable. It really didn't know which way to go, which leads to chapter 3. So I had somebody called me in August, the chair of the Department of Architecture at Iowa State called me in August, said, Kate, I need somebody to teach a studio. Will you teach a studio? Something I've done every August since, and Jim is now doing same thing, right? Something changes and you need to hire somebody. I said, yeah, great. And so for a while I did both practice and teaching, but then it became a full-time teaching and administration gig, which has been fabulous. So in 1990, after a decade of practice, going back to the academy, it was obvious that there was tension between education and practice. The ethos of the profession, including its myths, are created and nurtured in the schools with many negative consequences in practice. The culture of the academic studio, especially, is the foundation for the culture of practice. And it isn't all good, and was far worse 30 years ago. We've made huge changes in those 30 years. So some myths and consequences just to think about. 1, architectural education should require personal and physical sacrifice, which of course leads to unbalanced and unhealthy lives of students and practitioners. 2, the creation of architecture should be a solo artistic struggle. Collaboration with other students means giving up the best ideas, leading to architects not sharing their best ideas. Now this one we've really done much better at. At the time I was in school and coming back to teach, collaboration was not happening. 3, design is correctly the master value, but it is too often too narrowly defined, focused on aesthetics and theory, and not integration and performance, leading, of course, to shallow solutions in practice, to frustration of individuals who get in practice and have very little access to that kind of design as it was defined in school. Here, too, we've made huge strides in 30 years. 4, the best students are those who spend the most hours in studio, and they should spend as much time as is available on their projects, leading, of course, to practice undervaluing time. This is still a problem, and maybe leading to society undervaluing architects. I think they're related. 5, it is possible to learn about complex social, this is myths, right? It is possible to learn about complex social and cultural issues while spending all of your time sitting at a studio desk, which leads to architects being not really well informed or educated, and to the often repeated accusation that architects are ignorant and arrogant. 6, the last one of the myths. The canon of architecture in the US is white, male, Northern, and Western European, and is taught and practiced by those same people. So I recognized the issues, and I started to teach professional practice and design, and tried to improve architectural education through my teaching and administration. I was 9 years associate dean there. I also started to investigate practice, which I am still doing. The curricular change of which I'm most proud that I led at Iowa State is the core design program. We created they have architecture, landscape architecture, graphic design, art and design, interior design, industrial design, community and regional planning. It's a full design college. We created a first year that all students take, which really works for that set of disciplines. And then at the end of that first year, students can apply to any or all of the professional degree programs. It's worked fabulously. And they get to know each other. They learn a little bit about every discipline. Then they go get specialized, you know, and then at the end of their undergraduate careers, they come back together for option studios that are also multidisciplinary, when they can bring different things to the conversation. So I'm proud of that, but I'm even prouder of the accomplishments of students that I know. And of course, I've been teaching long enough that some of my former students are just doing amazing things. So timing in life is everything, right? And coming to Clemson in 2010, it could not have been better. I inherited and hired amazing faculty and staff and met and taught so many amazing students. And students, you need to know, you know so much more than your faculty did at the same time in their lives. I mean, right, faculty? Come on. You know, I look at what the comprehensive design students are doing and I think, wow. I mean, compared to my last quarter of, yeah, it's just a different world. So we've done a lot here. I won't recount all of them. We have increased diversity. We've increased faculty gender balance. The degree programs are known, respected, ranked. The faculty are ambitious. Our graduates are sought after. As many of you who are graduating have multiple offers. And when we have 80 firms show up for a career expo, that's all good, right? But most importantly, we continued to nurture the most collegial academic environment I've ever known. And that collegiality allows us to be innovative, to be confident, to be willing to take risks, right? It's been my honor to participate here. It's been a blast. Something else that's been a blast is, oh, there we go, that whole list, sorry. I'm currently working on some practice-focused research. Kelsey Piotrowski, who's my grad research assistant, and I have interviewed 25 principals of these leading firms, and it has been so fun. And it makes me really positive about the future of practice. I mean, these firms are so invested in research, in building performance metrics, in social justice issues, in developing and furthering a culture of practice that is totally engaged. I mean, every time after one of these 1-hour interviews, it's like, yes, all's right in the world, you know, this is good. Lots of them doing pro bono work, community engagement, taking a certain percentage of all their net earnings and putting it towards good I mean, it's inspiring. Okay, chapter 4. So when I made that move from practice to the academy, I wanted to stay engaged with practice. I also wanted to bust some of those myths, or at least try to bust some of those myths. And it became apparent to me that participation and leadership in various organizations might be a way to do that. And although it wasn't my primary reason for getting engaged, I also had a wonderful time meeting so many inspiring people and traveling to so many wonderful places. By now, I've been to 6 continents, 30 countries, 48 states, almost every Canadian province. So along the way, I had some firsts and onlys. I mean, I was the first woman president of AI Iowa. I was the second of the AI National. Committee things I did, you know, included, well, international advocacy, trying to get to international agreements. There you see me with Antoine Predock when he got the gold medal. That's what that, and when I put the gold medal around his neck, he said, "Kate, does this mean I don't have to do continuing ed anymore?" No, you still have to do continuing ed. Up at the top are all the former presidents at the time. Susan, the #1 woman president, wasn't there, so it's just me and a bunch of guys. I chaired the UNESCO UIA Education Commission, trying to make education of a higher quality around the globe. That was fabulous. Met amazing people there. Studio Culture Task Force was something that I think made significant change that really got at those myths and changed architectural education. I think I was on 4 rewrites of the NAB accreditation conditions. Finally, I think we got it right in 2020. It was sort of slow progress, but I'm pretty happy with where we are now. And along the way, I discovered that it's important to be a role model and spokesperson for women's leadership, diversity, and equity, which leads to the final chapter of the story. So certainly at the time when this photo was taken, women in architecture were exceptional ones. They still are in leadership roles. They're not, I mean, we're over 50% female in architecture schools, but you all know the statistics of how those numbers dwindle over advancement in the profession. In 2009, the AI sponsored the first Women's Leadership Summit, and I was asked to provide the keynote. I was in Chicago, and I started doing research into women in architecture, and there wasn't much out there. Oh, I forgot an earlier story. So when I started doing practice research when I was teaching, I was trying to find statistics on women in architecture in Iowa. And so I reached out to the head of the licensing board, who'd offered me a hymn in my, or whatever, or a genderless certificate. And I said, Marie, how many licensed women architects are there in Iowa? At the time, there were probably 400 total licensed resident architects in Iowa. She said, okay, we don't keep those statistics, because they didn't at the time. Nobody did. And I said, well, what's your guess? She said, 10. I said, yeah, that's right. There's Sherry, there's Judy, there's me, there's Martha. I mean, I knew all of them, right? And we had this small little group of women architects that would get together for lunch every once in a while. So then I said, Marie, are there any African-American architects in Iowa? Silence. Well, Minnesota has one. And I said, do we share him or what? What? And of course, I knew him too, right? Okay, so I started looking into trying to find information about women in architecture. And I came across this quote that I used, and I've used for years since, by this feminist Charlotte Bunch. You can't just add women and stir, which of course means you can't just add a new group of people to an existing culture and expect the culture to stay the same, right? Or you can't try to keep a culture the same and add new people, right? It doesn't work that way. And I thought this was part of the dilemma of women in architecture. We really have and are changing a culture. So since I wasn't finding any information except this 1973 information from that 1975 report, which was sort of old in 2009, right? I did the most rudimentary of research. I went to the top 20 firms as listed by ArcRecord or somebody, or top 30 firms, I can't even remember now. And I just went to their websites and I clicked on leadership, and then I took a screenshot of who they said their leaders were. And most of the pages looked like those 7 guys. There might be 3 of those guys, or 5 of those guys, or 7 of them, but it mostly looked like those guys. Every once in a while, there were a few women, like SOM there. So I looked at, that was, okay, so what is the percentage of leadership of the top-rated firms in the US that are women? And at that time, 2009, it was 10.7% female. But a lot of those people weren't even architects. They're the HR director, right, or the accountant, or the person, yeah, something other than an architect. So then I was asked to look at this like every other year, and saw significant change. So here's some results. Well, first of all, look at 1973. When I was my senior year of high school or my junior year of high school. 1.2% of the architects in the United States were female. 1.2%. 5.5% of the faculty and 8% of the students. And then, by the time we get to 2014, those are big changes. And these changes have happened for a number of reasons, but primarily because people from my generation and following generations and the generations ahead too really try to make change, right? And part of my message is you all need to try to make change where it matters also. So by the time we got to 2014, 2015, it was up to 17.9% from that 10.7%. So we're making progress. And you can see in every category in those 6 years, there was significant improvement. Not significant, but at least improvement. Some of it's significant. And back to this one, those 1973 numbers just still amaze me. So what caused the change? We stirred a lot. We were very vocal advocates, and there were a whole bunch of studies done that really, we had no data in 2009. We have a lot of data now, right? Everybody's sort of, this is an issue, and we need to try to understand it. But it's not fixed yet, as a couple very recent major studies show. So this study had over 14,000 respondents. I sat on the committee, the Equity and Architecture Commission, that said we needed to do this study. So regardless of place in practice, female architects and designers earn lower salaries than their white male peers and are less likely to hold positions of leadership. Mothers and minorities, particularly, this is 2018. Most respondents, regardless of personal identity, work in firms led mostly or entirely by whites and mostly or entirely by men. Female role models remain scarce. And this really, again, it doesn't, this is the same report. Approximately a 15% pay gap in late career, but gaps at when they start and when they continue. And it's not true. Sometimes I hear, well, women don't negotiate. BS. That has not been my experience. And these studies also show that that's not true. That women will, and also it's like, don't blame the victim, So we have some problems. So I love the name of this research study, which is a 2021 study, right? The most recent study. The elephant in the well-designed room, right? Isn't that great? It's so appropriate for us. Yeah, we've come a long way since the 60s and 70s, but women and people of color remain underrepresented, particularly in upper-level positions. Now, you can say, well, it takes time to get there. Well, we've been working on this for a long time, right? So the current research sheds some light on an important reason that women and people of color leave their firms and the field entirely. Bias, right? We all have it. So this is a very long report. If you're interested in it, I can send it to you. There are all sorts of charts, and they list results, the things that they found to be the primary problems. This is just one chart. So this is all based on self-reporting, right? How often are you interrupted? How often do you feel like you have to work twice as hard? Do you think that taking family leave will hurt your career? Do you have difficulty getting admin support? Are you assigned more behind-the-scenes work? I don't have to interpret these findings to you, I don't think. And back to some of those myths. Design as master value. Women and people of color do not get as much opportunity to participate in design. I mean, you can see here, allowed to develop design ideas. By the time you get down to women of color and multiracial women, Native American, I mean, there is significant difference there. So what do we do? Well, like I say, we've made huge progress, but we need to continue to make progress. And it's not enough to just say, I believe in it, right? It's not enough to just talk the talk. You have to walk the walk. And that means that we need to measure it. We need to build evidence-based, metrics-driven bias interrupters into hiring, work assignments, performance evaluations, and meetings. And this is happening in many firms. Another story. So that first year that I did those screenshots, Smith Group was one of the firms that had 3 white guys. And when I did it again in 2011, same thing, that was their leadership. 2015, Smith Group was one of the presenters at the conference. And they didn't know I was in the audience. And they presented my slide. And they said, we saw this 2 years ago or 4 years ago, and it made a difference. We were embarrassed. We didn't know that we didn't feel like this was the firm we had created and the culture we had created, but if that was the perception, that was a problem. And if you look, and they purposely then started really trying to address issues of bias in their firm. And if you look now, it's remarkably different. A question that comes up often is, do women lead differently? I don't know. I mean, and it's not really the right question, but we certainly need different styles of leadership in our professions and in society at large to deal with the very complicated issues we have today. So, Andrea, have you seen this photo before? No? So erasure is the theme of the NOMAS conference, which is going to be fabulous. And it absolutely is an issue among underrepresented architects of color, and also is part of herstory, or her story. So this is 2014, and the BBC was doing a show, The Brits Who Built the Modern World, and they photoshopped her out. She and her husband founded Hopkins Architects. Look at these photos. They photoshopped her out. I mean, that's the most flagrant erasure I've ever seen. This was one of the most recent women's leadership summits. We have persisted, and we are making a difference, but there's still a lot to do. The lack of equity in architectural practice and allied professions has made them prone to lose talent to other seemingly more lucrative career paths due to multiple factors that challenge retention. Long hours, low pay, lack of transparency for promotion, and work that is misaligned with professional goals. In order to have justice and equity in the built environment, the design workforce needs a more diverse representation that reflects the rapidly changing demographics that we serve. We are also prone to the public not fully understanding the value of what architects and allied professionals bring to the table in terms of the social impact of design that can inform equitable, just, and sustainable public and private spaces. Her story is your story, is our story. So finally, the moral of the story. We are each shaped by our experiences. You're shaped by your experiences. I certainly have been shaped by my experiences. Welcome the focus that brings to you, and also pay attention. Understand that better than I did, I guess, that those weird things that are happening to other people too, and it's part of the culture in which we live. Second, somebody has to be the first, second, third, 100th, and you should go for it while maintaining a sense of humor. A sense of humor is really key. Third, life is far more interesting than anything we can plan, and be open to the possibilities. Say yes more than no, and understand that sometimes a lateral move is the best move. That the way to a full life is not always straight up. right, is often not straight up. Change is possible and necessary, if sometimes slow, and each of you have responsibility to drive change. Thank you. Thank you, David.
Yeah, I think it's working now. Yeah. So, yeah, thanks a lot for that wonderful lecture. I think it was enlightening, moving, and I think we learned so much. Everyone in this room learned really a lot from it. So, from your background, understanding who you are a little bit better, and at least that it was that way for me. And I think I'm sure it's steered actually quite a few questions, especially from the students.
Thank you, Kate. That was an incredible lecture. So I think I have a question in regards to, like, in your career you made a lot of moves. How did you know when it was time to move? Because I think that's something that we all kind of face is, and especially students kind of moving from academia to the profession. I think those moves are challenging. So how did you know, and how did you know it was the right decisions too?
Well, very good question. I wasn't a fit. It's okay to also sometimes make the wrong decisions. We learn from that too. But when I got bored, that's when it was time to, when I wasn't learning anything, that's when it's time to make a change. When you start to understand that there may be a new challenge out there, or when your life needs adjustment. I mean, certainly when I switched out of practice into full-time academia, that was a little bit of a break for me before I got into administration. And it was such a privilege to have a little bit more free time to spend with my family. I also, something I forgot to say, sorry, Barry, if you're watching. I couldn't have done any of this without a real true life partner also. He's also an architect, and when he was practicing and running a firm, he was also the guy that he became the primary cook in the family, because I was either 45 miles away at work or someplace a lot farther away. He made almost all of the trips to the emergency room with our children, and if you have children, you'll make trips to the emergency room. And that allowed me some freedom to make those moves, right? But don't be afraid. I mean, if you make the wrong move, you just move again. It's not a, just like, I know so many of you are looking for jobs and you're so stressed out about making absolutely the right decision, and you should make a good decision, but you're not going to make the wrong decision, especially at this time in your life when your job is to really gain experience, right? And so you know what you want to do later in life. Does that answer it, Michael? Okay. Anybody?
I'll just say it out loud.
Okay.
I've got lots of voice.
I'll repeat it.
So I truly appreciate the fact that you devoted your life towards shaping the mind of others in this academic setting. One question is, when did you know, or what qualities about academia made you know that this was the right thing for you? And the second question is, in your professional career, what things did you learn that benefited you most in the academic curriculum?
Okay, so the question is, the last part was what from your professional life benefited you the most in academia, and the first part was what made academia the right choice? Why did you? So, well, I'll answer the second one first. Having a decade of practice really informed how I approached being an academic, both in teaching and in service and in research. I mean, all of my efforts were sort of shaped by that 10 years of practice, right? So understanding things like just the collaboration between, the importance of collaboration between architects and consultants and contractors and subcontractors, and really enjoying that whole process. I think that shaped how I approached my academic career. You know, I've said to, unfortunately, you all have probably had a faculty member that you think, why are they even teaching? I'm not talking about architecture faculty, but somebody, you know, some teacher sometime that's just, they're miserable, right? Why don't they go away? I mean, I just think there's no greater privilege than spending your life surrounded by 20-somethings. I mean, it is inspiring to be with all of you all the time, to know that the future is in your hands. I mean, there's no, it's hard to describe. So that's and once you find it, and sometimes teaching, you can see a light go off, you know, whoa, that's so cool when that happens. But most of the time, students are making a light go off in my brain, right? Especially creative design students. So that's my answer. Yeah. Yes.
What advice would you give to young women entering the profession? Just like, quick, go.
Just go for it and stand up for yourself. Be true to yourself. Know that you can do it. That there are role models out there now. Also, support each other. I think women can do a lot in advancing each other. Don't be afraid to find some colleagues who you can have a glass of wine with or whatever and talk about the issues that you're facing. There's some terrific women in architecture groups that I think have really done a lot. For instance, one that my daughter, I mean, we have two daughters, an architect and an interior designer. And the architect chaired the Iowa Women in Architecture group for a while, and they developed these guidelines for equitable employment themselves that really dealt with this. That's very helpful to you as you're advancing your career to understand those issues. Enjoy it, that's the other thing. And if you're not enjoying it, you know, do something else. Any other questions? Where? Oh, Vincent.
Always. So, I know you've given chapters and a conclusion and a moral to the story, but I think of it kind of like a pause. So what's next?
What's next? I'm not really sure. I mean, I'm now the secretary of the AIA College of Fellows Executive Committee. So I'll be chancellor in 4 years, which doesn't mean much to any of you, but I think the College of Fellows needs a boost. So anyway, there may be people on Zoom, so I'm not going to say a couple things, but but I'm definitely going to do, and also it needs a boost and it needs more diversity, and yeah. So that's a professional thing I'm doing. I have some research I want to finish up, and otherwise I'll have more flexibility to see family, to travel. I spend a lot of time at gardening. Pulling weeds is my stress relief. So I spend a lot of time in the yard, and I'll probably be doing more and more of that. And I don't know. I'm a little nervous about retiring because I've always been sort of, the job has defined me, so it's not, I'm not totally there yet. I could always come back. And maybe I will teach a course every once in a while, given the opportunity. Bo.
I'm gonna try and say it without crying. So you have two daughters. I have two daughters. What was the best advice that you gave them, and for their time? And is there some advice that you would give a young girl of this time?
The best advice is to just let them know they can do whatever they set out to do, and then support them in that. Our daughters got to compete in athletics much more than I did, and I think that was terrific for them. It wasn't always great because, like, they were 2 years apart, and sometimes the older one would be benched when the younger one came in. So it was like, oh, really? But some of that competition and learning to deal with the challenges and hardships of that, and you just give them every opportunity you can to pursue their interests, and to make mistakes, and to be a little independent. If I have a regret, sometimes I think we didn't give our daughters enough room to be independent, and that's one concern I have about children today. It's different than when my mom would lock us out of the house, and we never locked our kids out of the house. But they did walk to school. We had that advantage, which I know is difficult to do now. Being a girl daddy is a fun thing, and I know my husband wouldn't trade it for anything. And fathers of girls are extremely important to their success. Mm-hmm. Anything else?
So you mentioned how whenever you're in a room, when you're the only woman in the room in the professional setting, and it seemed normal to you, what advice can you give to today in the professional setting when you go up to those situations and you meet like your undergraduate advisor that told you that it wouldn't be the best decision? What do you say when you meet these kinds of people that are stuck in like this, I can't the right wording, but like this old-fashioned, yes, exactly.
Yeah, what do you say to people who are narrow-minded? It depends on the person a little bit. Sometimes you may sense that there's an opportunity for change, and so then you try to be diplomatic to make that change happen. Sometimes, I've always said, pick your battles. And sometimes the battle just is not worth it. There's not a chance you're going to change that person's way of thinking, and it's not worth getting upset about. Or you can get upset, but you're not, yeah. Being a good observer of human behavior, I think, is key. Yeah. Okay, we good? Thanks again.